Previously on agentpalmer.com, choose your illusion, a Guns N' Roses exercise, a gallery of wizards, and as you heard exclusively on this show, Paula has returned with a new season of the Tell Me Stories podcast because everyone wants more Paula. This is the Palmer Files, episode 11, featuring a co-host of the All Us Geeks podcast, Jordan Steinhoff, where we discuss geek versus nerd, the importance of local stores, nerd culture, geek community, and then Jordan tries to open me up to new games. Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 11th episode is the co-host of the All Us Geeks podcast, Jordan Steinhoff. Jordan and I had crossed paths for years on Twitter as our circles are pretty similar, but I only started listening to the All Us Geeks podcast in the last few months, which upped our relationship from some occasional tweeting to regular Twitter conversation. I like All Us Geeks, and you should too, because it is a general knowledge geek show in that they don't get too far into the weeds on anything, and when they do, it's in the form of a game review, and they start from the beginning so everybody knows what they're talking about. Jordan makes up half that show, but through our online discussions, I thought he would be a great guest to discuss the topic of geek and nerd culture. I see the geeks of the last few decades being the hippies of the 1960s, in that, in hindsight, it seems like there were a lot more of them than there actually were. With the net and the dot-com bubble and comics and science fiction and fantasy starting to become mainstream, every new feature film based on some nerd stuff has the potential to cross over. But have we? Are nerds and geeks mainstream? Are you a geek or a nerd? How have things changed? And what's the difference between the US and Canada within the geek nerd culture? Jordan and I will get into it, plus tell some stories. Now, before we get to the episode, I want to talk about Jordan's reverb. He must have been recording from a safe house in Minnesota because clearly he's a gaming fugitive of some kind, right? I mean, he has to be. And, well, maybe I shouldn't say this. The walls were kind of bare and it was dimly lit. Perhaps he was being held captive and it wasn't a safe house at all. He didn't say anything, so maybe the Stockholm Syndrome set in already? All right, I think that covers it. If you want to discuss this episode as you listen or after, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, you can tweet the show at The Palmer Files, and you can tweet Jordan at _the Canadian _. You can also hear his show, All Us Geeks Podcast, wherever you are listening to this right now, and you can visit allusgeeks.com. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings on agentpalmer.com, and remember, all of these links and those mentioned in the show will be in the show notes. So grab your spells and leave some mana open. You may want to counter this episode because here it comes. Jordan, you're a co-host of All Us Geeks, but are you a geek or a nerd?
I'm going to say 90% geek, 10% nerd. I make the distinction. Geek is more of a social, cultural, pop culture kind of thing. Star Wars, Magic the Gathering, cartoons. Nerd is more of a science or math or lit nerd, that kind of thing. And I can certainly throw some snob on and talk about cheese or beer, which I think is more of the nerd thing, because that's when I get pretty judgmental. But I try to stay geek and keep it fun.
When you were growing up, either term was interchangeable and they were derogatory.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you feel like we've gained anything because our stuff has become accepted?
Yes, but well after the fact. I'm 48. I'm so far past worrying about what people outside of my community think of me that I don't care anymore. I did the trials back as a child in high school and middle school, and even in university, where the gaming club was still pretty small, and beer and pretzels and geek. Even in the early 90s, nerd geek was still a negative connotation. The community has grown. The geek community has grown. The use of the word has changed from a negative into a well-accepted descriptor. I think nerd still has a bit of a negative to it, whereas geek is more positive. It's embracing versus pointing the finger. Geek, yay, nerd, that kind of thing.
I will say, I feel like while our stuff, whether it's books, movies, music, technology, our stuff has become more widely accepted, I still don't feel widely accepted.
No, nor do I. I think there's definitely stigma might be too strong a word for it these days, but I use, what was that show called? Big Bang Theory as the example. First couple seasons, I enjoyed it. I was amused by it, but it seemed like they were poking as much fun at the nerds as they were trying to engage the audience to laugh with the nerds. And I think that's still where we are. There's a greater gaming community where everybody, I hope, is accepted. But then there's the community around the gaming community that I think still has some misconceptions.
So I'm going to take you on a trip to the mid to late 90s. I don't know. Let's say 96, right?
Sure.
I'm in middle school, and there is a gaming store that opens up in my small little town in rural Pennsylvania, okay? We were the county seat. That was our claim to fame, okay? So not a big city by any measure. And I was just walking with a friend, a fellow geek, nerd, what have you, and we kind of just happened upon it, and we both knew what Magic the Gathering was, and like I had learned it at camp a couple years ago, and I don't know how he knew it, but now this store opened up and we had a place to hang out. And I dug much more into the culture than he did. And, you know, a new community that I was able to embrace sprouted around this store. But at the same time, I'm, you know, fast forward a couple years and I've got a girlfriend, and look, we're skittish. Okay. I'm going to speak for us on a whole. Like I, even though I crossed a lot of communities, and Magic the Gathering was one of my identities, and I ran cross country and I was in the marching band and all this stuff. When I worked at that store, if my girlfriend came to visit me, it was a record scratch. Like heads turned, like there's a girl in the store. And it was, look,
hot girl in the comic book shop.
The owner's wife would be around all the time and used to help teach some of the younger kids how to play Magic. But I guess maybe it's time, or like she was older than us, so it wasn't the same. But a girl anywhere within 5 years of our age, and it was like, it got quiet. Like, what's she doing here? Like, she doesn't belong here. Unfortunately, like, it feels like while things have improved, I don't really think we've gone very far. And I'm not talking even about Gamergate. It's just like there are still these closed circles.
Oh, absolutely. I try to keep an open table. I try to keep a welcoming table, whether I'm doing an RPG or a board game or cards, whatever. There's a certain bodiness that just, even if you put 5 priests at a table, you know, if they're just 5 dudes at a table, somebody's going to crack a naughty joke at some point. I try to police that for myself a little bit. But there is definitely a feeling, even though I look at my social media and I see strong, active women running their games, running their game companies, running their lives the way they want, you can't go a week without not necessarily a Gamergate or a Me Too, but still. And this dude at the table tried to explain the game to me that I was running for him. You can't escape that kind of story. So there's definitely still a gender bias there.
Well, there's a gender bias, and there's also a Johnny-come-lately bias. Like I know for a fact, because I've been that guy where it was like, oh, you and listen, I'm a resurgent Magic player now that Arena's a thing, because, you know, Steph didn't want to continue playing with her limited cards or with my decks. That was just not going to be a thing. So Arena's gotten me back into Magic, but for a long time it was like, well, I was an OG. Like I started You know, and I wasn't. I mean, here's the thing. I wasn't, right? Like I started at Revised and Fallen Empires, and I fell in love with sets that no one likes, okay? And that no one remembers. And I watched Twitch streamers that started playing after I got out of the game in 2000, right? And I'm still like, well, you can't tell me anything about, you could tell me what I missed, but you can't tell me about the game. Like, and there's,
I remember when Mana Burn was a thing.
Oh, listen, so a previous guest, Jason Zapata, who's episode 9, where we talked about adaptation and interpretation. Like we grew up, we went to high school together. He knew me when I was still at the store. And it wasn't until his brother got him into magic that he really embraced magic. It's not like he wasn't, like we could still talk Tolkien and we could still talk about like fantasy and, you know, whatever, but like I couldn't get him into magic, and his brother did. And I remember when he was like, I don't know, I have one of the older cards. I'm not going to get too technical, but it had, you know, you get 2 mana during your turn to spend. I think it was like a Latimer's Vineyard, maybe. I'm not sure, whatever. So he's like, I was like, you take 2 damage. He's like, no, I don't. I was like, well, you didn't use the mana. He's like, Mana Burn's gone. And I was like, well, in this house, Mana Burn still exists. Like, I got so indignant by the fact that, like, wait a minute. They got rid of Mana Burn. And I'm still the guy who was like, listen, despite the fact that attacking does not cause this creature to tap, became vigilance, and this creature can attack as though it didn't have summoning sickness, became haste. I was still like, why do we need these words? It was already written on the card. Like, and like in hindsight, sure, it makes it easy. It's more accessible for other people to play, but like, I didn't need this. Why do you? And, and listen, it's different in gaming. I understand in gaming, the argument's valid throughout everything, right? Whether it's gaming or movies or books or music, like I was there before, and we always carry that with a badge of honor. But like some of these, change is hard. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Like, especially when it's something that you spend that much time in, and by definition, whether it's nerd or geek, whether it's technical or game, we spend a lot of time in these things. So when they go mass market and when they become more accessible, like it's like opening the doors to your clubhouse, and you never had control of your clubhouse, like unless it's your game. And even then, but like a lot of people, when we start out, we're in somebody else's clubhouse. You're watching somebody else's movie. You're reading somebody else's book. You're playing somebody else's game. And then all of a sudden it blows up and you're like, where'd all these people come from?
It reminds me of the 22 Jump Street movie. I don't know if you watched that.
I saw the first remake. I didn't see the sequel.
Well, in the sequel, again, they're going back to school and they're trying to play off being the tough dudes like they thought were the cool dudes when they were in high school. But now everybody is like at a table playing D&D. They're talking about their magic cards, blah, blah, blah. And the one guy's like, man, if I had just been in high school 5 years later, I would have run this joint.
I will say this too. I'm as guilty of it as the next guy. Like, I want it to be inclusive, but at the same time, like, I've said shit. Like, I've been that guy that's like, what are you doing? You don't belong. Like, you don't. And to me, it's not along gender lines. Like, I'm all about you were either there at the beginning or you don't count. Or like, I guess more specifically, it would be like, you either read the book or you just watched the movie. Like, and that's a big one. I mean, and it's, comics, it's huge too. Like, we all saw Civil War on the big screen, but did you read that series? No, you didn't. You don't know what happened. So it's taking ownership of the origin and being there at the beginning. Like, who got there first? Okay, maybe people remember Buzz Aldrin and he punched a guy, so why wouldn't you? But can you name me the guys who were on the moon in Apollo 12?
No.
You know what I mean? Like, so it.
I gotcha. And that's one of the things about just my geekery is my wife for the last 10 years of Marvel movies, for example, and half of the stuff on Netflix has turned to me at some point and said, so why? What made this happen? What isn't in the movie? What isn't in the TV show? But they've caught up so much and there's so much new stuff out there that it's like, hey, I don't know. This is my first time too. And that's a really fun feeling. Like, I never read the Witcher books, have no intention to, but I enjoyed the first season. And she's asking me all these questions and I'm like, no, I didn't read it, dear. I have no idea. So I'm happy every now and then to be the new person in the room.
Yeah, I can go back to Magic. I can go back to books. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I wish I could recreate the first deck I ever made that worked. I know it was green and white. That's where my memory ends, right? And
I was always blue control.
I mean, listen, I have a propaganda deck that isn't mine. Before net decking was a thing, I went to visit a friend in Connecticut, and we went to his local game store and a tournament, and I got my ass handed to me. Because whenever propaganda came out, whatever set that was the first time, and I literally got knocked out of the tournament. I leaned over and said, "Can I have your deck list?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." And he gave it to me, and I was like, "This is this is 2000, I guess it would have been." So he's like, "Yeah, here," and I was the first person that had it in my circle. So it was like, but yeah, no, I hate blue. If I'm not, like, I'm either playing it or I hate it.
The favorite thing for me is just, as long as I have 2 mana, my fingers don't leave the table. They're just hovering right over those 2 blue mana, because nobody knows what I can do with 2 blue if I'm playing blue.
I mean, listen, I will tell you, I'm still this goes back to the OG argument. I'm upset that counterspell doesn't exist anymore. But not my favorite 2 mana counterspell. That belongs to Arcane Denial. Alliances will forever be my favorite set. I've gushed about it on my blog. I don't know why, and maybe it's timing, right? Like, because I started when I did.
It had all those great lands.
Well, it had all those great lands. You had things that didn't cost anything, right? You had Force of Will, and there was one in each color. I still use the white one. I think it's Scars of the Veteran, where you didn't need to pay any mana at all. I see your 2 blue mana, and I'm not gonna need any. Like, it was great. Give me a better card than Elvish Spirit Guide for green, right? Like, because for that set came out and everybody tried to do a first turn Shivan. That was it, man. That was everything. But it's so easy for me to go back to these origins. And I have to break myself of that, because it's not right. Like, I should be happy anyone wants to talk to me about this stuff in the first place. And my first inclination is to alienate people and be like, you weren't there. You don't know.
Back in my day.
Well, but it is, because, like, there are, I don't know. Listen, I was fortunate enough to move around in a bunch of circles. I could talk to the jocks. I could talk to the nerds. I was a geek. I could talk to the popular kids. You know, I kind of moved around in all circles, and that's not something that everybody has the either abilities or circumstance to be able to do. And it's not like I was a chameleon. Like, everybody knew who I was. I didn't hide it. Like, I know I should be more forthcoming and open to, like, putting the crutch on people and just being like, do you want help understanding this? And that's a hard thing to do, because my first instinct is defense, like, or to deflect, like, you weren't there, or like, are you making fun of me for this? It's still there. Like, it's 2020, and it's still like the initial flinch of, like, they're making fun of me because I like Star Wars.
No, it's true. You know, there's a little bit of PTSD from your youth, but there's still also, I think, in society in general, at least in North America, some of the, I'll go see Star Wars, but I'm not going to wear a Star Wars t-shirt and a hat. I'm not going to cosplay a Jedi while I go there. Those people are dumb. There's still some of that out there. I don't think they're dumb. That's just there's still definitely some of that out there. There's a lot of judgment from those outside looking in.
Well, I think, and it's what's disturbed me the most is that while I think the community has not grown, which maybe is part of my what disturbs me is that while everything has become accepted, it's not like comic sales haven't gone up because Marvel movies are huge. And there weren't more people reading Tolkien when Peter Jackson did his adaptations and stuff. Like it gets co-opted, but we basically circled in on ourselves for a little bit there.
Co-opted is the wrong word because I look at that and I go, you're right. The Marvel movies didn't inspire a big increase of readership net, but I imagine it did work to a certain extent to get new or younger readers in there. And that's the problem with DC and Marvel more so than the indies is people like me have aged out. I don't find their writing particularly engaging anymore. So when I was a kid, the older readers who read the Golden Age comics were like, no, Alan Scott is the only real Green Lantern, and his weakness is wood, not this Hal Jordan bullshit with yellow. And I'm kind of there myself now. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I don't have a really violent response to it, but they're trying to make their medium more relevant to a younger age, a digital age, people that are not necessarily looking for the comic book store, especially in an era when the specialty shop is going away nationally too. I think it's a case of young readers are coming in, but one-to-one older readers are leaving.
So there's one thing I would touch on there, which is one of the biggest things I think you and I had growing up was that indie store.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was a community. It was, and listen, there are online communities and I'm not putting them down, but you can't see that I had a rough day at school when I walk in the store or when I tweet. Like, unless I tweet that directly, you can't read body language and you aren't hanging out all the time. And when we had those stores and anybody of a certain age and within any part of the geek, nerd, comic, gaming community is, as I'm talking, picturing their particular store or stores if they had more than one. And while I don't know if I have spoken to anybody from any of those stores in the last decade or two, I still feel like if I saw one of them on the street, like I would still know them.
I would hope.
A lot of stuff has happened.
Time in those stores. Way too much time if you ask my bank book at any given point of the 90s and the early 2000s. But one of our early eps in All Us Geeks was the need for the store. We were talking from a game concept, the game store, not the comic store, but the need for the store. What with Amazon, kind of taking over the world, miniature market and cool stuff, digital outlets for buying whatever you want, and places like BGG and apps nowadays that just let you find people locally or within your comfort for driving and go into their house. And I'm like, I've always been a proponent of the store because I get to see more stuff than what is going to be at my friend's house. I'll get to see more people, I hope. I'll have a broader social interaction and not ripping on any of my friends, but I see these people and I talk to these people on the daily. It's nice to see other people. And when it comes right down to it, if you don't have a store in your community, who's ordering stuff that makes the companies want to put more money into it? It can't just be the online retailer. I mean, there's great savings at places like Miniature Market or Cool Stuff Inc., but you're not going to go to that store and play your game. They're just going to ship it to you. it's great having resources like BGG or apps where you can find people, but the store is a good place to have community, which I think part of the gaming community is the community aspect. Go there, talk to the store, talk to other people that you don't necessarily see on the daily. Talk to people about what they like. What games did they bring in tonight? Why am I going to play Exploding Kittens when I think it's the worst game ever? But everybody's at the table and that's what got thrown out. Why? Because that's where the community came together that night for Exploding Kittens. So I think there's a big value in having the friendly local game store, FLGS.
Yeah, and I like the idea. So mid to late 90s, we did Magic. Obviously, that was kind of the big one. And then Pokemon came in, and while I didn't play, we welcomed them in, right? I mean, sure, we were older and we made fun of the little kids, but just the same, they sat and they played, and, you know, a lot of them played Magic as well. And the other thing that the owner was kind of at the forefront of was we had three. We had 3 LAN networked computers for Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness. Diablo, when it hit in 96, was huge. And Quake, the biggest one being Quake. Like, people would sit around playing a networked LAN Quake for hours.
There was a store in Toronto, just off Yonge and College, for the people that might be listening in Toronto. Gone now, probably. But back in the day, they were one of the first LAN party stores whose whole model was just there to let you come in and put down $6 an hour or something. And they had Quake, Unreal, and Duke Nukem.
Okay.
And it was exactly that. Just people will go in there, and I did it. Just go in there, and you're just talking shit, you know, to strangers. But that's because you're in the moment. You're shooting, you're getting shot, you're running around, you're ducking, you're diving, and talking smack, having a good time.
I yearn for the LAN party. Like, I have older computers that I hold on to with a few, like, Quake's still my number one. And unfortunately, of all the people I can get together with, I'm the best player. I'm not good, okay? But of those people, I'm the best player. So, like, I have to, like, die. Like, I have to make a game of it. Like, I almost have to be like a dad and let the kid win a couple times. So, like, they'll keep playing with me. But I've put all this time and energy into making sure these older, and I think they're all running XP, because if you upgrade too much, then you lose some of the LAN capabilities for the built-in games, and then you have to spend a lot of time hacking around. And I don't want to do that. I mean, as much.
That's why you're a nerd.
Well, that's why I'm both. But there is still something about it. And you know what? While we did listen to music and, you know, we did whatever, like, as the guy who was working, quote unquote, I mean, it was the best job. I will never have a job better than that, right? Like, I don't think I made any money. I might have gotten paid in store credit, but at that point, who cares? Like, I'm just hanging out with my friends and just all the time. It was great. But, you know, that's something that, even with the headset, like, online gaming's not quite the same. Like, I can't give you a side eye. I can't lean away from my console and, like, nudge you. Like, that just doesn't happen. But there's these literal interactions that with a LAN party, or like, throw me a bag of Doritos. Like, it's just whatever it is. Like,
no, I know what you're talking about. I feel you, because we have the same conversations about our RPG groups on Discord or Roll20. You know, I don't mind getting together as a group of people that I'll do digital gaming with all evening long if we all have the evening together. But come down to it, if everybody got together one summer and said, hey, we're all going to go to Minnesota and hang out with Jordan for a weekend so that we can all be in one room, that would be far better, even though it's all the same people. To my mind, as much as I love my Xbox and my PS4, nothing beats in-person gaming.
No.
I like the tabletop simulator app for some stuff online where I'm theory crafting, you know, like when I used to play Star Wars Destiny, you know, stuff like that. But give me person to person.
This is odd for me to say, but it's a realization I've come to as we've been talking. I've almost become, like, gaming learning averse, which is not where I started. So when I was working at the store, one of my jobs was to learn all of the games we sold so I could help teach other people. So it wasn't just Magic. And by the time Pokemon came, I was kind of off the hook because we had enough like local kids around that, but we also sold Spellfire, which is kind of like a precursor to Magic. And I still have decks, and there was the first Star Wars the trading card game.
Oh, that Decipher game is hands down my favorite CCG ever. There
was Middle Earth, which was one of my favorites, and it wasn't even my love of Tolkien at the time. It was just it was one of the few CCGs that had a solo component to it. And then I also learned how to play Monty Python, Holy Grail CCG, and I feel like that might be it. And I still, ridiculously, through moves and college and moves and an apartment and my own house, I still have most of all my cards. I still have like 4 or 5 Spellfire decks. Like I still have 4 or 5 Middle Earth decks. Like it's kind of ridiculous that I held on to that stuff for so long. I still don't remember how to play anything other than Magic, but then when I sit down and Steph's like, I want to play a new board game, I'm like, I don't want to. And it's not that the games aren't fun. I'm not as into learning new games. I don't know what happened. And I don't want to say it's age because I'm learning I'm open to learning other new things. It's just, I just want to have fun now. I don't want to spend 15 minutes trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, but every game doesn't have to be a grinder like that. There's plenty of low entry point in terms of both money and brain power games out there.
Well, that's fair. I'm all about low entry. It's one of the things that I have no problem admitting that I was an addicted wannabe professional Magic player at the time. Right?
You can't say you've spent 20 years playing Magic and not say you don't have an understanding of complex games.
Well, no, I do have an understanding of complex games, but I feel like it took me quite a while. Well, I mean, it was living and breathing. Like we used to go to Pro Tour qualifiers when they were still called Pro Tour qualifiers in the Northeast. So it was like we drove from Pennsylvania to Providence, Rhode Island, or New York, or New Jersey. Like, they weren't.
Do you remember your DCI number?
I still have my original DC card with the original arena stickers on the back. And I tried to 15, 20 years later. So 5 or 6 years ago, I tried to log in and they were like, yeah, that's not a number anymore. We don't use those numbers. We retired those numbers. I was like, oh, great. But when I got back into Magic the Gathering Arena and I was like, oh, this is great. This is a way to kind of play with it. I was like, I'm not spending any money. I'm drawing the line here. No money is being spent. I will spend it on other things, but I know that if I even spend that first dollar, it will open a can of worms. Because it's kind of the recovery model, I feel like, for a lot of us of a certain age, or once you get, I don't know, post-college maybe, or you grow a little bit away from whatever that game was. It doesn't have to be Magic the Gathering. And it could be a digital game. It could be World of Warcraft, whatever it is. When you spend time away from it, you go all right, maybe one. Maybe I could play one game, but I can't buy a pack. No, don't. I don't want to buy a pack. Or, maybe I could play for an hour, but I can't. It's too easy for me to sit in front of this computer for the next 25 years and just so there's this recovering addict feeling of okay, fine. If you really want to play, but don't go over the waterfall. Because we all have that ability and it doesn't matter what it is. We all have those things, whatever your game is, we all have them. And it's kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, because I felt like you have a show about geek stuff and gaming. And I feel like we've kind of insulated ourselves a little bit, because the difference when we talk about us versus them in the geek and nerd communities is the them don't have that. They play a game and they can kind of put it down. There is an addiction, I think, for us. Maybe not everybody and maybe not equally, but like there is an addiction because it's love. We love these games. We love these movies. It's more than just, well, that was fun. No. That wasn't fun. That was an experience. Like there is something deeper for us. And it's kind of one of the reasons that I feel like there's always still this us and them.
I might agree with you on that because I experienced that quite a lot. I mean, Sarah and Megan, Jeff and mine spouses, we have our monthly game night. And when it's them, it's social first, game second. And our game selections are always, not to sound like we're putting them down, but casual friendly.
Sure.
Because that's what they are. They're casual gamers. I don't necessarily like that term because it can have a negative connotation, but we're getting together to talk and eat and therapize a little bit as much as we are trying to save the world when we're playing Pandemic or something like that. And there's definitely a spousal us in them, but I think that gap is closing because enough popular media is embracing things. I've been in the stores and people have come in, like when Marvel Crisis Protocol, a minis game came out last year. It's not the old Marvel Comics characters. Everything's derived from the movies, the characters, the costumes. Everything is derived from the movies. And I think that's a really great move on Atomic Mass Games' part because it's saying we recognize that there's this history, but we're limiting ourselves to the movies because that's what people know. And there are little moves like that through the game industry, whether it's minis or board or cards, that they're trying to take down that barrier of entry, remove that inside-outside thing, remove that leap from casual to hardcore, if you want to say that. And I think as an industry, while it is slow, I think it's definitely happening. And I think it's definitely a good thing.
Yeah, look, I acknowledge I am as much of the problem as I am the solution. Like I am the master of my own domain, and like I need to be more open. And I know that that's where it starts. And I'm not saying I'm closed by any stretch of the imagination, but I also know like you've been listening to me for however long in this podcast. I've made it quite known like I was there first, even if I wasn't. Like and it does, it doesn't matter what the game is. And I also get accused of being a little closed-minded. So like there are games I love from that period of time, right? Like I never got into World of Warcraft, but I could play Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness forever. And I never played anything past the first Diablo, which I still go back and replay all the time. And while I have played Quake 2 and Quake 3, that first one is all I really need. Like, and I get accused all the time of like, at least play Diablo 2. Come on. Like go to the next one, right? Like,
you're too young to be a grog. And so don't be a grog.
My age may say otherwise, but my mind, I really am an old man. Like that before my time, I've been an old man for like, so I am 36. I'm 36, but really I'm 56. Okay. In age, I'm 36, but in mind, like, and in spirit, I am such an old man. I am such a grumpy old man. Like, it's just, I can't, and I embrace it a little bit because it's fun, but like, I don't know if as time goes on, I'm ever going to de-age. Like, I seem to be staying the same age.
You can de-age though, because it's absolutely a mental thing. I know you're somewhere in deepest, darkest Pennsylvania, but there's got to be a game store. Just go walk around and look at something other than Magic.
No, we do. I mean, within, 35-minute perimeter, there are like 7 comic/gaming stores. And when we're out, we stop by one or two, like whatever one we're closest to, we'll stop and walk through. And I'll talk to people, especially, look, we've talked a lot about like our love for the local store, but I will tell you, I have been in some shitty ones where it's like, if you're not on the inside, like you're nobody. And that's kind of always my my go-to. Like if I walk in and you say hi and I can strike up a conversation with you, I will always attempt to buy something at the very least the first time because you were nice. The second time I'm on a budget. I want to have like, whatever. But like the first time, no. And if you're friendly enough, I've bought some just old like Alliance singles because like I wanted to keep talking to the guy. And that kind of, listen, I'm your target demographic, right? I'm a 30-something with no kids. So like you should totally want me in your store. You don't want to kick me out. Like my income's disposable and like I can spend it here. Not saying you should kiss my ass. You should be as nice to me as you should any other person who walks in. But
right. The stores, whether it's the game store or the comic store or any kind of niche store, I have found that the bad ones are just as cliquey as high school ever was, like portrayed in Heathers or anything like that.
Absolutely.
It's just as cliquey. And the sad part is they don't realize it because there's a customer base that is always there. So they think they have this customer base that is always there. And it takes them a while to realize that new people come in and maybe buy things one time, but don't come back because they're not opening. There might be, it's clean, hopefully. It's well laid out, hopefully. But if nobody says hi, whether it's staff or another patron, and if that table is always closed off, either through an attitude or just not enough space, then no, people aren't going to go back. Why would I go to a dirty store where the owner is grumpy and people are polite and accepting, but not inclusive? And I don't mean that in the gender way. Just there's no, don't sit. I'm not telling you not to sit down for my game, but I'm also not going to invite you to sit down to my game. So why go to those stores? The good stores survive, not just because they have something to sell, and this is circling back inadvertently, but because they're a place you want to go.
Yeah, listen, nobody ever got kicked out of Cheers. Like maybe if they got in a fight, but like Cheers is what you want your local store, whatever kind, to be. You want it to be Cheers. And you know what? Even to the extent where like you want the strangers to look up when Norm walks in and everybody says, "Hi, Norm." Like that's a part of it because then the stranger's like, well, how do I become a Norm? And it's great. Like that's something people should want to be a part of. And absolutely. There's a time thing too. Like I was in high school. I was done for the day at 3:00. Maybe I had a sport, but it's a commitment now. I have to give up a weekend in order, you know what I mean? Like it is like, it's so if you're not going to be welcoming, I'm going to stay home or, I'm going to play my game online or, whatever. But I didn't realize I didn't expect this to be a lament for like local stores, but like they are disappearing and it is disappointing because like I don't have any kids, but if I did, like I would want them to have that experience. And since I don't have any kids now, by the time like I do, like, oh, are there going to be any left? Because it is a great experience. And it's even outside of the games. It's just hanging out. I remember 1999, we got wind that there was going to be a live action Lord of the Rings. And for like 2 weeks, we spent every conversation trying to Dreamcast Lord of the Rings. I mean, listen, I wish I could find what we had said. We were dead. We had nothing. I can tell you we had nothing right. Okay.
Nobody knew who Viggo Mortensen was back in the day.
That's right. We didn't know who any of those guys were, but that was a fun 2 weeks. Like it might not seem like it, but that was a fun 2 weeks. It was more than just gaming, and those conversations don't have, like maybe they happen in your house, but if they happen in your house, you've probably had them before. You're not inviting strangers over to your house. So like your best friend of 15 years, you've had every conversation at a certain point. And it's fun, don't get me wrong, but like the online community, back to what you said, like the online community cannot replace the physical one.
For All Us Geeks, we've always been about the community aspect of whether it's the game community, the game design community, the geek community in general. Because for both of us, we're both of the same mindset, Jeff and I, that if there's no people, there's no game. If there's no people, there's no point in writing that comic or being in that movie. If there's no people. And so when we go, like when I would go to X-Wing or Star Trek tournaments in Roch, a couple times a month, we would have 4 hours scheduled in the store, and we would be there for 8 hours because it was 4 hours for the game and then 4 hours of just sitting around and shooting the shit, talking not just about what we played, what did I do wrong, what could I have done better, theory crafting for the next tournament, but whatever the new geek movie was at the time, whatever, I was still reading comics at that point. So it's like pick up my comics and, leaf through them, talk about what's going on. I missed a couple issues. Don't tell me about what's happening over here, that kind of thing. And that's the community aspect that's always been the strongest part for us. When we had a larger Patreon following, we had a benchmark where everything over a certain amount for our monthly expenses, we do an 30 days of podcasting back in the early days. And it was kind of a pledge drive thing. And X amount went towards our annual expenses, and the rest went to Jack Fassel Auction. And we did that for a couple of years because Jack Fassel Auction is a really important charity. And we want to support that because we know people that have been helped by that. Personally, that has impacted our lives. So we think that's a good way to turn around and give back. All our stuff isn't necessarily that altruistic, but it's definitely about keeping the community and not keeping it the game. The games are there, but the games are there for the people. The comics are there, but they're there for the people. And people need to be in the stores, or people need to be in their basements, or people need to be just on the bus talking about these things. Yeah, that's our thing.
Yeah, no, for a very long time, I lived alone. I lived the bachelor life, and, movies are better when you get to walk out of the theater with somebody. Like, I'm not afraid to go to the theater by myself. My digital community / my phone, because my phone, there are probably a number of people listening to this show right now that have heard my voice way too much on the phone because I'm a talker. Like, don't text me. No. I'm going to call you. Like, we're going to talk. And yeah, by the time I get to my car, if I'm seeing a movie by myself, I'm calling somebody I know who's already seen it. But it's better to walk out or to sit through. I'm a sit through the credits guy every time. But it's also a great time to talk about what you just saw with whoever you saw it with.
Back when they introduced Thanos in the first end credit scene, I try to stay spoiler free so that I can go in there and have 100% no preconceived notions. And then they showed Thanos, and I was like, holy shit. And my wife was like, what? And I'm like, I'll explain later, but just that was the best moment of the year for me. That's all you need to know. And it was great because, like you said, she was right there. And as soon as I left the theater, hitting some Facebook groups and just throwing it up there. Did you see it? Definitely stay for it. It's worth it, And then as more people see it, I definitely enjoy the digital community. There's absolutely a need for it and a space for it. Don't get me wrong. I know I've said it like 3 times, and it sounds like I'm all people all the time, but there's definitely a space for the digital community, whatever your geekdom is.
Yeah, it's whether you're in a store, when you're a part of that community, there's still, it's not like everybody's the same. You're not clones, right? Like, there's always there's that guy who plays blue all the time, right? Like, it's just how it works. Or like there's a bigger Tolkien fan, or
you made that sound pretty negative.
I did, didn't I? Or there's a guy who likes Star Wars more than everybody else. And we all have our list of priorities in fandoms. And that's one of the things that the online communities help you embrace is like, I'm a super fan of X. Well, now you don't have to talk to, somebody from your local store who's sick of talking, like hearing you talk about it. You can talk to somebody or have a conversation on Twitter or in a Facebook group or on Reddit where they want to dive deep into, the color of they want to, and that's part of what makes both both communities are important. Like it's kind of a balance of both. I did want to ask you before we get like too far away from it. You immigrated.
Both, depending on which way you're looking at it.
Okay. That's true. So, but you grew up in Canada. Your formative years were in Canada.
Yes.
So is there a geek cultural difference or is it not?
At the time I was growing up, I'd probably say that the experience of somebody my age in either country was going to be the same. I'm almost 50, so that's going back to the 80s, late 70s, where like Redbox D&D was coming out. There was still definitely, when you were a geek or a nerd, there was no good to it. You know, okay. I wasn't taken out behind the schoolyard and wailed on every day for that. But there was definitely, you know, that's him. You know, he'll help you fix your computer, but he'll also talk to you about it too.
Yeah, that's universal. Yeah.
Modern times, you know, not the Paleolithic era of gaming. I imagine there is going to be a difference because of population density, because of the exchange. If you go into places like Quebec, where everything has to be bilingual on a storefront, and sometimes the auditors will come in and say, you can't sell this because it's not bilingual. There's going to be some moderately different things, but some things will transcend that. Magic, big in both countries. The big board games are going to be big. The individual experience with those games or within a community, I mean, I think that'll be just as regional as anything between Pittsburgh and Minneapolis, New York, and Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. This show, the Palmer Files, has been fairly North American, is what I'll call it. I've had one non-North American on so far. I've kind of gone down the Canadian rabbit hole, and I'm sure at some point that will get talked about a lot. But I was just curious because like we take it for granted when we're growing up, like what we have.
I've helped my brother grow his gaming group. His gaming group is my brother is 9 years older than me. And his gaming group is everybody that was in my gaming group when I was in high school. So I left the country. He moved back to our hometown. Many of them came back to our hometown. And they found each other through Magic or through just happenstance. Some of them are in IT, so IT crossing paths, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And then they get together and they start to play games. The biggest thing that I find is finances. It pains me to say this. So much as a Canadian. God damn, everything is so expensive up there. And I know where it comes from and I know where it goes. And I understand that. And I've made this argument to other people down here when we talk about healthcare, shit like that.
Sure.
But when I'm trying to give him the hard sell on Tyrants of the Underdark, which for me was a $45 game, and up there at, admittedly that was an online purchase, but up there in the brick and mortar in Barrie was $60, only because of the exchange, the cost of getting it to Canada, and then the cost of keeping the brick and mortar going. That's a hard sell. It's a really good game, Scott. Yeah, but I don't want to spend $60 on it. I understand that. But
yeah,
buy it.
That's got to be pretty hard for the stores too, though. I mean, especially because, well, none of the online communities see the border or the exchange rate. So if you're in like a Facebook group or on Reddit or on Twitter and somebody's like touting a game, you go to your local store and look for it. You're not thinking, I mean, maybe after it happens a few times, you're thinking about like, oh, is this going to be available for me? But like, that's not the first thing. Like the first thing is, oh, that sounds like a cool game. Like that's your first, or it should be your first inclination.
The most common question I get, like anywhere, is what's the Canadian equivalent of Miniature Market, or what's the Canadian equivalent of Cool Stuff Inc.? And I'm like, I just don't know if there is one. I'm sure there is something, but in terms of a national retailer that sells online strictly, I don't know if there is one. And with a population of barely 35 million, I would be surprised if there was one.
Yeah, that's hard. And with the population density so close to the border, and well, why don't you just drive across the border and
exactly,
that's
your exchange and your cost of gas is going to be there anyways, and it's still probably going to come out.
Well, listen,
cheaper.
if I don't have a job soon, you and I are going to go, I don't know, somewhere just south of the border, and we'll open a store that's like games for Canadians.
Yeah.
We'll point the sign north, and we'll just wait for them to come down.
There you go.
Punch holes in the wall if there ends up being one on the northern border.
Oh no, we're all nice people up there. There's no wall for us.
You're gonna try and keep us out. I know how this works.
Oh yeah, I know there's a wall there, but it's not to keep us out. It's to keep you guys out.
Yeah. Look, you on All Us Geeks review games.
Yes.
Do you have and listen, you've got like 1 million episodes, right? Like, I mean, you're not just barely getting into double digits like this tiny show. But if you were to try and sell me on 2 or 3 games. Now, mind you, okay, as far as games go, outside of Magic and the ones we've already talked about, right? I have played Exploding Kittens. I've played Oregon Trail. I've played the Labyrinth game. And that's all because of Steph. And I myself am a huge fan of Risk and Stratego, though no one wants to play Risk with me ever, because everybody says the same thing about Risk that they say about Monopoly. It's going to take 4 hours. Well,
no.
Well, it's going to be 4 hours before somebody flips the board and then somebody else wins by default. But like, give me
like Dungeons and Dragons.
I
do
like
familiar with that at all?
Yes, because I do have an ongoing Pathfinder going on right now.
So I'll throw it out there because I just mentioned it. Tyrants of the Underdark. It's based around the Underdark, where the Drow come from. I don't know how well versed you are, but so it's where all the Dark Elves are. And it's really, in the lore, they're cutthroat, really angry, evil. Everybody hates everybody, blah, blah, blah. But it's a bit of an area control game like Risk. It's a bit of a deck builder. So you're trying to improve your deck with your resources as you go on. But it's got a defined end and an easily achievable end, unlike Risk, where unless you set, we're only going for 3/4 domination, it can literally take forever if somebody just turtles up in Australia and never leaves,
Well, that's usually where I start. I mean, not to give it away, but like you find a corner and you make it a stronghold and then you go out. Like that's
right. And hey, that's an excellent learned skill to take into Tyrants of the Underdark. It's got your area control, but it's got a defined end that is easily achieved. Everybody's working towards the same goal, but everybody's going to do it a little bit differently depending on what cards they buy. All right. So then you like Magic.
Yes.
So there's an older game called Mage Wars. It might still be in print, but it's not as popular as it used to because it's a game that's morphed. It went from a big box to, expansion, and we're going to change it up a little bit here. So it's a generally 2-player game. You've got your spell book, similar to Magic. Everything has a cost, similar to Magic. And what makes it different than Magic, though, is you're on a board. The board is your arena. You're putting your cards out like you would with Magic, but rather than just kind of in your imagination staging these battles, my Shivan does, You're moving your stuff around to position them like you would in a more tactical game.
Okay.
So do you like zombies?
I would ask what kind.
Okay.
I don't like slow zombies. All right.
Okay, so that marks that out. But so I'll throw them both out there. There's 2 games. Again, these are not new, but they're still out there. One is called Last Night on Earth, and that is a zombie game. where you're in the traditional Romero-esque kind of zombie apocalypse. It's the apocalypse hasn't even happened. It's a small town. The zombie infestation has started. Group of humans trying to stop the zombies. It's got a sister game, but it's about the alien invasion.
Okay.
Many of the same mechanics, big glossy boxes, many of the same rules, just rethemed. All right, so that's 3/4 games, and you like exploding kittens.
I'm okay. So here's
you've played exploding.
Well, I was gonna say here's the thing. It could be the people I'm playing, but I'm deviously good at exploding kittens. I don't know if I like it, but I'm good at it. So there's the gamer in me is like, oh, well, I keep winning. So it's hard not to like it.
So if you want something that is simple, but a little bit more luck based, there's a game called Sushi Dice. And if you like, it's a dice roller and it's got a nice little bell so that when you've completed rolling the dice to make your sushi plate, you ring the bell. That indicates you've made your plate, fries are up. It's 3 to X players. It goes as big as you want to go, as much time as you want. And in many dice games where somebody's rolling dice and everybody else is kind of watching, this is a little bit more interactive because the people rolling the dice are trying to make their sushi plates based on the cards that are out there, but they're also watching each other because if a black skull comes up and you notice your opponent has the black skull on the die, you can yell yuck and make them pick up everything and start their plate over. The people who are not actively rolling the dice are also watching everybody, well, the 2 players that are rolling their dice, because if both rollers at the same time have the black skull up, they all chopped and the round ends. The dice moves on to whoever yelled chop and then whoever has the fewest cards. So it's a dice roller with not as much strategy, we'll call it, as exploding kittens, but I think it's far more fun.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And if you like, have you ever played Shadowrun?
No.
Do you like any of that kind of cyberpunk themed type stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fair. Like, so. I mean, I talked about being an old man. I'm still fairly open to things. I'm just cranky.
If you want kind of a meatier game, not super meaty, not risk meaty, but something that you and 2 or 3 people can sit down and spend a couple hours doing, still have more time in your evening if you do long evenings, that kind of thing. It's called Shadowrun Sprawl Ops. There's a lot of lore to it, but you don't need to know the Shadowrun lore to enjoy the game because everything that you're going to be given to play the game informs you on what you need to know about what's going on in the game.
Oh, nice.
If you know people that have played Shadowrun and enjoy it like I do, it definitely does take it to a higher level. But the base level of just picking up this game because you want to do something with dice, it's a dice roller, and from a really visceral dice rolling aspect. If you have a big enough team, you just have this big double hand of dice, and the dice are big. So you're just rolling like 20 dice to get your best combination of results. But it's the primary mechanic is dice rolling in this Shadowrun world. But everything you need to know about the world, they present to you in the rules and in the fluff in the rules.
Nice.
Yeah.
This episode goes back to who I am and how I identify, or at least that's what I thought. There are a ton of things, as evidenced by the previous 10 episodes, that make up who I am now, but this was a huge part of my self-identity at one point. There's no denying that store and the games we played there consumed me. It's one of the reasons that I am who I am right now. I firmly believe that. But I shouldn't be so quick to be exclusionary. As pointed out by Jordan, there still exists some PTSD from when being a geek or a nerd was not the cool thing. When it came not with blockbuster movies and television shows, but with ridicule and revulsion. In editing this episode and listening back to Jordan and myself, my takeaway is different than it was in the moment. While I do think it's okay for the geek stuff and the nerd culture to be more widely accepted, why is that coming without the acceptance of those of us on the fringes who helped nurture that stuff in the first place? Before it was cool, nerds and geeks were tinkering around with computers. We were playing role-playing games and reading comics. So when those things become more widely accepted, why weren't we? Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. And while I'll admit it's better than it used to be, that doesn't mean we are where we need to be as a society. And one more thing. A former boss used to refer to someone we worked with as a geek, saying that he was just as much a geek as I was. I have no issues with the sentiment, and I went one further, replying with, there are more of us than there are of you, right? And I genuinely believe that statement. I genuinely, without a shadow of a doubt, believe that there are more nerds and geeks out there than there are people who aren't either of those things. Why is a stigma that felt accurate in every John Hughes movie from the 1980s still a relevant thing in the year 2020? Why is it always part laughing at you and part laughing with you instead of just always laughing with you? Is this really what winning feels like? Well, we haven't won, at least not yet, and it has more to do with me and Jordan in the fact that we try to keep an open table and we try to keep an open mind. It's almost like a bad movie. We shouldn't be trying to do anything. Our table should just be open. Our mind should just be open. And as we work on that, things will get better. Now it's on us to be more inclusive. It's on us to be open. Where once they were not, it's on us. And for those of you who listen this long and aren't a part of the club but want to be, if you don't come to the table with condescension, you probably won't get any in return. You get what you give. Well, on that nice light note, thanks for listening to the Palmer Files episode 11. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for more official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can let me and the guest know what you think. You can tweet the podcast at The Palmer Files, myself at Agent Palmer, and you can reach this week's guest, Jordan Steinhoff, at _the Canadian _. You can get more of Jordan on the All Us Geeks podcast wherever you are listening to this podcast right now and at allusgeeks.com. The show email is thepalmerfiles@gmail.com, and don't forget to visit agentpalmer.com to see what else I've got going on. You can also hear more of me in the meantime on Our Liner Notes, a musical conversation podcast with host Chris Meyer, and my other gig as co-host of the Podcast Digest with Dan Lizette. All right, sir, do you have one final question for me?
So as we sit here, I see you got the Argos hat on, and you've been getting an education in CanCon with our liner notes.
Yes. I
hear you mention occasional little bits of Canada and love for this and that. So where did your desire to become a Canadian come from?
It's so,
and it's okay continuing to move north.
I don't think she wants to move that far north, but I think she'd come with me. It's odd, right? Because I've been a baseball fan my entire life, and it hasn't really come up on this show. But I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, and it wasn't really a thing that came up, right? Like I knew Canada was up there, but that was a thing. And then my aunt, who went. I don't know if she went to school there, but she lives there now, and she married a Canadian, and she is Canadian now. I think she's got dual citizenship. In 93, she sent me a Blue Jays World Series toque. And it was always like, them up there, right? And then my father, who was always bitter that the Colts left Baltimore, was ecstatic when the CFL expanded to the Baltimore Stallions. Except, while they won one year, they lost the Grey Cup the next year, or I don't know which order. I don't know which order it was, but like one year they were in the Grey Cup and they literally had the refs calling everything, so they didn't get it. And then the one year they actually won, and then the CFL said, oops, our bad, and took all the teams from south of the border, north of the border.
That was a dark age for the CFL. That was a bad experiment.
But my father continued his love of the CFL regardless of the Stallions because of the rules. So I started listening to our liner notes and started a friendship and relationship with Chris and Kristen. And, you know, kind of when Paul was still on in the early part of our liner notes, he would bring some Canadian bands and they talked a little bit about it. And, you know, around that time, ESPN started up a license deal with the CFL where on ESPN 3 at the time, before it was Watch ESPN or whatever it is, had CFL games. So you could watch them occasionally. So I would, you know, I started kind of following along in the CFL, but I didn't pick a team. And then, you know, fast forward a little bit further, and on Thursday nights, the CFL does concerts in the early part of the season. So Chris and I started talking more and more about Canadian music, because obviously if the CFL is going to showcase a band on a Thursday night football broadcast, it's going to be a Canadian band. So we got to talking, and that kind of is, it's not maybe how Chris and I ended up with the CanCon series we're doing now, but I kept it just led to further questions because some of the bands were new and some of the bands were old, but they were all new to me. Mm-hmm. I knew Rush, I knew Bryan Adams, like I knew your big exports, but like nothing else. And then it was my NASA file reading habits where I learned about the Avro Arrow, and it was literally in passing, and then it ended up me being like kind of going down a rabbit hole. But it was, you know, I learned that like the Arrow program was canceled, and all of the engineers came down here to help us go to do Mercury and Gemini and Apollo and go to the moon. And I was like, well, now I need to know more about this. And then while all of this stuff is overlapping, this is just how I'm thinking of it. And at the same time, at some point, Brent Butt was on WTF with Mark Maron. And I text Chris, I'm like, would I like Corner Gas? And he's like, you might. And so I've watched that series more than anyone should. And so I started realizing the way that show was set up. So it'd be like, oh, that seems like somebody famous. So I'd look them up and be like, oh, that's an actual famous blues guitarist, or, you know, whatever it was, and started picking up on some of these other things. I'm like, it just kind of snowballed, right? And then this season, the 2019 season, I finally decided to pick a team because I'm Jason, and I was like, well, my aunt's got season tickets to the Argos anyway, and my name is Jason, so I might as well root for the Argonauts. And of course, they sucked all year. So that absolutely makes sense. But it just kind of snowballed, and now I'm realizing how little I still know. You know, it's not that Canada is lacking in culture. It's just that none of it gets exported because we're so loud down here. Like, it's, you know, it's not even ego. It's just like, we're just loud. Like, oh, you've got a nice thing. We've got this and this and this, and you keep trying to talk and we just keep. So I kind of just feel like I haven't disliked anything that I've been introduced to. So it's like, well, I'm all right. I'm in on Canada.
Even Fresh West? You don't seem like you're a big hip hop guy. You seem to gloss over the Fresh West 20 seconds.
I'm not a really big hip hop guy to begin with. It doesn't, no, regardless of nationality, I guess. But the rest of it is just like, you know, I'm intrigued by how little I know, because and I'm a reader, so I'll probably end up starting to get more books on the subject and kind of continue my Canadian education and having contact with Canadians and just being like, you mentioned this on your show. I have no idea what that is. Or like anybody who's listened to the CanCon stuff in our liner notes, I don't let Chris off the hook for anything. So if he mentions a thing, I'm like, I don't know what that is. like what is that? Like what is going on? So Chris has been a big help. Kristen's been a help too. My aunt is always amazed at how much I know, and I feel like I owe it to the Myers for that. So I'm always intrigued if there's something that interests me that I don't know. And Canada's huge, and I know. I feel like I know about your football, a little bit about your music, and a little bit about your TV. Like that's it. And like there's so much more. And I know now about. I mean, I know about the Avro Arrow as well. Like I watched the fictionalized retelling starring Dan Aykroyd or whatever the CBC put out. Like I listen. Yeah. I'll dig in further, but like I was just kind of like, this is good. This is good.
As far as romanticized stories go, I mean, that was not bad.
I mean, I love the idea that, wow, at the very end, they're like, and one got away, or people like to say, but there's no conclusive evidence. So there's this one piece of like question mark at the end of that. And then right after it, they go into where all of the engineers actually ended up. So it's like this retelling and then 30 seconds of myth followed by like 3 minutes of like a roll call of a who's who for the future of space exploration in the United States. And it's like, well, this is quite a little, this took a turn into truth that the rest of the fictionalization was a bit, but no, it just kind of built up. It was kind of like a snowball down a hill, and now it's a massive boulder, and I just want to know more.
So let me ask you something, because you did say something, if I can have a follow-up.
Sure.
What's in high school in the United States? I could probably ask any of my nephews this. Do you have a Canadian history block? Like in Canada?
Nope.
We have U.S. history in every year, if you want to take it.
No, we have American history and world history, which isn't world history, it's European history.
Right.
Like I honestly, I mean, what I remember is American history and world history. And world history was, basically some Neolithic stuff, maybe your Egyptians and your Romans, and then we skip to a little bit of the British Empire, and then it's World War I, World War II. There's fires in Australia. We learn that Australia exists in like geography, but we don't even really talk about the colonization of it or, apartheid in South Africa. Like there's so much that like we just don't cover. So no, I mean, we don't, when we cover American history, we learn about the French and Indian War.
Right.
Some of it takes place in your country, but there's no, like, it's no mention, like north of Lake Quebec, like north of the Great Lakes, like it's not even like in Canada. So yeah, and I'm guessing that those history books, those textbooks haven't changed. So yeah, no, we don't learn anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sad, but interesting.